The 16th and final year of the BCS era was insane, with some of the greatest moments in college football history taking place along the way. And in the end, the two teams left standing that had storybook seasons, with both looking destined for greatness, and finally putting the flawed and contentious Bowl Championship series to bed for good. So first, a little history lesson. The BCS was the third attempt at replacing the national polls for deciding a national champion. The national polls had decided the national championship for over a century, and multiple times it finished with multiple teams having a claim to the national championship. Sometimes as many as 3 teams in 1 year. Sounds stupid? Because it was. First was the Bowl Coalition, which was created with the idea that the 2 best teams would play each other at the end of the year to determine a sole national champion. However, due to the Big Ten and the Pac-10 not being involved due to their obligations with the Rose Bowl, it failed miserably, as multiple teams finished undefeated and held a claim to the national championship. The coalition would reform into something called the Bowl Alliance, but it was plagued by the exact same issues as the coalition, as the Big Ten and the Pac-10 still weren't involved, and the alliance didn't recognize mid-majors, which was massively disrespectful to teams such as BYU. And finally, under threat from Congress due to the alliance's blatant antitrust violations, a new system was formed called the Bowl Championship Series. What was the Bowl Championship Series? Well, it's complicated. It consists of a mixture of polls, computer rankings, strength of schedule, and number of losses. Still a deeply flawed system that caused more confusion and arguing amongst fans than anything else. The BCS system would undergo minor changes throughout the years, but confusion was still rife amongst fans everywhere, as mid-majors like Boise State and others were constantly disrespected, and even Big 12 and Pac-10 teams were disrespected by the flawed system. But in the final year of its existence, chaos would ensue, with some of the greatest moments in college football history taking place. Unless you're a Georgia or Alabama fan. In that case, you might want to sit this one out. And finishing off the BCS era in style, the college football gods would give us 2 teams that seemed destined to etch their name into history. On one side of the field, we have the Auburn Tigers, led by head coach Gus Malzahn in his first season in Auburn, and boy was it a wild one. They were the definition of battle-tested, with the 6th toughest schedule in the country, a brand new head coach, and a quarterback who had never played a single down at the position at the D1 level. Sounds like a recipe for disaster, but they would start the year 3-0, with 2 of those wins coming in 1-score games. But they would walk into Death Valley, and LSU would dominate them from start to finish, handing Auburn their first loss of the season. But they would recover with massive ranked wins against Ole Miss and against a top 10 ranked Texas A&M team led by Johnny Manziel. 3 wins later, they would welcome Aaron Murray and the Georgia Bulldogs into Jordan-Hare Stadium. The Tigers would blow a 27-7 lead, and Murray would put the Dogs on top with less than 2 minutes left in the game, and facing a 4th and 18 from their own 27-yard line. This happened.
3-man rush. Let's it go. Oh my God! Oh my goodness! Oh no! Ricardo Lewis!
A play that will be forever known as the prayer at Jordan-Hare. Next up was the Iron Bowl, one of the greatest rivalries in sports, where the number 1 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide would roll in looking to secure their spot in the SEC championship game. This matchup, though, would be an all-time classic, and it would come down to the final second, literally, with 1 second left after a lengthy review to determine if there even was 1 second left on the clock. But ultimately, with that 1 second left, Alabama would line up for a 56-yard field goal attempt that will forever live on as the kick 6.
56-yarder.
Does not have the leg. And Chris Davis takes it in the back of the end zone. He'll run it out to the 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh my God! Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game. Auburn's going to win the football game. He ran the missed field goal back. He ran it back 109 yards. They're not going to keep him off the field tonight.
Auburn would run away from Missouri late to win the SEC championship and cement their number 2 ranking, sending them on to Pasadena in the national championship game. But on the other side of the field stood one of the greatest college football teams of all time, the 2013 Florida State Seminoles. Led by head coach Jimbo Fisher in his 4th season at the helm in Tallahassee, coming off an Orange Bowl win the year before, they were an insanely talented team, with redshirt freshman and Heisman Trophy winner Jameis Winston leading the offense, along with Devontae Freeman, Rashad Green, and Kelvin Benjamin. They were the number 2 offense in college football, averaging over 50 points a game and doing it with ease. And on the other side of the ball, their defense was terrifying, with Timmy Jernigan and Mario Edwards Jr. on the defensive line and a secondary full of NFL talent with guys like LaMarcus Joyner, PJ Williams, Ronald Darby, and future Hall of Famer Jalen Ramsey. As a unit, they allowed a staggering 12 points a game. Add that all together, and you get one of the most dominant teams in college football history. They had one game all year where they were challenged, and they still won by a comfortable 14 points. But against ranked teams, they were even more insane. Their offense still found a way to average 50 points a game while giving up an unbelievable 9 points per game in those games against ranked opponents, outscoring their opponents 200-35. Their schedule was not nearly as tough as what the Tigers had to go through, but they did play 2 top 10 teams in the number 3 ranked Clemson Tigers, who they destroyed 51-14, and the number 7 Miami Hurricanes, who they beat up 41-14. They would cruise through the ACC championship game in typical blowout fashion for them, with a 45-7 victory over the Duke Blue Devils, locking themselves in as the number 1 ranked team in the country and booking their ticket to Pasadena. And after all that, it was finally time for the national championship game at the Rose Bowl, a venue well accustomed to classic bowl games during the BCS era. Auburn would get the ball first and immediately turn to their run game, the strength of their offense, but it would fail to get them going as they would be forced to punt to Jameis Winston and the Noles' high-powered offense. Winston would take the Noles right down the field on his first attempt, leading the Noles down into the Tigers' red zone, but the Tigers' defense would stiffen up, holding the Noles to a field goal as they take a 3-0 lead early. On the Tigers' next drive, Nick Marshall would be under siege from the Noles' outstanding defensive line, but on 3rd and a mile, he throws an absolute dart to Marcus Davis for a big gain that puts them in Noles territory. But they would be forced to punt again, but a great punt would pin the Noles back inside their own 5, and the Tigers' defense would step up, forcing a punt, and Chris Davis, the hero from the Iron Bowl, has a great return that sets up a Nick Marshall to Trey Mason swing pass to put the Tigers up 7-3. The Tigers' defense would step up again with another big stop to give the ball right back to their offense. A Trey Mason 23-yard run starts the Tigers' next drive, and Nick Marshall finds Melvin Ray wide open down the seam to put the Tigers on top 14-3. Meanwhile, the Tigers' defense would continue to be the biggest story of the game early on, as they're making Winston uncomfortable as he and the Noles offense continue to struggle, giving the ball right back to the Tigers. The Tigers' ground game would start to take over on their next possession, but Cody Parkey would miss a chip shot field goal, but luckily for the Tigers, Winston would fumble the ball right back to the Tigers, and Nick Marshall would punch it in as Auburn's dream start continues and their lead expands to 21-3. And the Noles offense would continue to struggle, and with his team needing a spark, Jimbo Fisher calls a fake punt that fools the Tigers and gives the Noles life. Finally, their offense would start to find success, and Devontae Freeman would punch it in to cut in to the Tigers' lead. Gus Malzahn would be content to take his lead into the locker rooms, draining out the rest of the clock as the Tigers lead 21-10 at the half. The Tigers forced the Noles to go 3 and out to start the second half, but Chris Davis nearly muffs a punt, a problem that would continue to persist for the Tigers the rest of the night. But the Tigers' offense would do nothing as the Noles' defense was starting to flex its might, and Winston would lead the Noles down into field goal range, where Roberto Aguayo, one of the greatest college kickers of all time, would make it 21-13. But on the kickoff, it's Tigers fullback Jay Prosh dropping the kick but being able to fall on top of it to avoid disaster. Both teams would be forced to punt on their next possession, and Auburn would avoid disaster again as they muff the punt but fall on top of it to keep possession. But again, both offenses would be forced to punt on their next possessions, and as the defenses are starting to take over the second half, the Noles secondary would step up with PJ Williams getting a huge interception that he proceeds to fumble, but the Noles would fall on top of it to gain possession. The Noles offense would finally reward their defense, moving quickly down the field with Winston finding CJ Abrams, who makes a great play on the boundary and takes it in for the touchdown. However, after the play, Devontae Freeman would be called for unsportsmanlike conduct, forcing the Noles to kick the extra point instead of going for 2 to tie the game, as the Tigers' lead is now 21-20. And the Tigers' offense would finally wake up, moving the ball down into the Noles' red zone, but being held to a field goal attempt. This time, Cody Parkey would connect to put the Tigers up 24-20. But after flirting with disaster all night long, the Auburn Special Teams unit finds what it was looking for, as it allows Kermit Whitfield to take the kickoff 100 yards for a touchdown to put the Noles on top 27-24. The Auburn Special Teams unit continues its abysmal night. But the Auburn offense wasn't done producing classic moments just yet, as Trey Mason would run through Jalen Ramsey, literally, en route to a 37-yard touchdown to put the Tigers back on top, 31-27. And all eyes would turn to the Heisman Trophy winner. On his 20th birthday, Jameis Winston has a chance to take his team 80 yards for the win, on a night where he struggled more than he has all season. And to start the drive, Winston would turn to his favorite target, Rashad Green. First for an 8-yard completion, then for a massive 49-yard catch and run as the Noles offense moves quickly, smelling the championship that they had worked for all year. The Tigers would be able to force a big third down, but it's Iron Bowl hero Chris Davis committing a massive pass interference in the end zone, putting the ball at the 2-yard line. And on the next play, this happened.
Listen up under center. No, throw it. End zone, jump ball. Touchdown! You know who he went for, number 1.
Finally, the Tigers had run out of miracles, as the Noles would hold on to win 34-31, capping off their undefeated season in dramatic fashion. And with that, the BCS era would come to a close and give way to the college football playoff. Again, a system that still has its flaws, but is an improvement over the BCS and the systems before it. With expansion of the playoffs on the horizon, as the playoff committee looks to expand the playoffs from 4 teams to 12, it all seems to be heading in the right direction. But only time will tell if the playoff will finally solve college football's problems, or if it'll end up being just another flawed system like the ones before it.